Great. Hi, I'm Liz Edsel. I'm the chair of the Winooski Charter Commission, and tonight I'm joined by my fellow commissioner, Hussein Murray, and we're going to be sharing a little bit more information on the Winooski Charter Commission's work over the last few months, what the town is considering, and the process and some questions. But before we get started, I just want to take a moment for me and Hussein to share kind of why we've volunteered to spend a bunch of time this year working on this topic. I moved to Winooski a couple years ago and really love the community, and I love the diversity of the town. And when I heard about an opportunity to get to know some other residents and work together to educate the community about what potential for changing our charter to allow all residents to vote locally, I really got excited about that, and have been loving the opportunity to work together with such a diverse group over the last few months. While we're all so different, we all share this love of Winooski. So that's been really wonderful. And Hussein, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Hussein Amori. I am a rising senior at Winooski, and I am also a member of the Charter Commission, as Liz said. So I love Winooski because I've known this city as a very welcoming city, a city where everyone is welcome. And, you know, I wanted to keep it that way. And it's one of the reasons why I joined the Charter Commission in the first place. I want us to be a welcome community, way more than, in how we are as a city, but in how we are governed, and, in how we elect people. And I think that's very huge. And, I hope all this works out very well.
Great. Thanks, Hussein. So we are two of 5 voting members and 2 alternates, and then we have 2 school board liaisons as well who sit in on Charter Commission meetings, and a city council member as well who is our liaison. So a lot of folks spending time together on this work. So to start, we'll talk about what a charter is, and then what our Charter Commission has been working on. Then we'll talk about the process for a charter change, and our commission's policy considerations and answers to frequent questions. And we hope that there's time left at the end for a few questions. All of this info, the basics, are on the fact sheet that's on winooskivt.gov/charter. And has been translated into 7 other languages. So Hussein, why don't I pass it to you, and you can tell us, what is a charter?
Definitely. So a charter is the governing document that says how our city is run, including who votes in local elections. In Vermont, cities and towns can make changes to the charter through a lengthy process called a charter change. We'll get to that process in a bit. The charter only covers local matters, not state or national elections. Okay, so local elections are limited to city budget, school budget, city ballot questions, i.e., charter changes and bond votes, city officials, school officials. These are separate items from state/national elections and would be presented on a different ballot from elections on a state rep, Senate, statewide offices, as well as U.S. Senate, U.S. Houses, and president/vice president.
Great. So we can change this charter, but it takes a lot of steps. So the City Council has talked for a couple of years about a potential charter change that would expand local voting rights to residents who are, for whatever reason, not U.S. citizens. So that's where the Charter Commission comes in. The council formed our committee to really further examine the potential for presenting voters with a charter change that would allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. And the reason why the measure had actually been discussed and potentially put forth for consideration, but there were a lot of questions that came up. And so the city council really wanted a commission to think about a lot of those questions, get public input, and educate the public on what policy considerations we could have. And there's interest in considering this in general because all of our residents contribute in a multitude of ways. From paying taxes to buying homes and property, opening businesses, sending our kids to schools. You know, there's so many different ways that people contribute in our community, and together we create the advantageous diversity that our community has celebrated for almost 100 years, regardless of our citizenship status. So a change to our municipal charter would allow any qualified Winooski resident who may, for whatever reasons, not have U.S. citizenship to vote only in municipal elections. And this would give a voice to our neighbors in local matters that affect them, their families, and their lives. We're also working on some administrative updates to the charter and considering other proposed charter changes. Those are all part of the same process, which I'll ask Kevin to pull up that graphic that we sent. But the matter of all resident voting is the biggest focus that our commission has spent a lot of time on to date. So let's see, do you have that visual pulled up, Kevin? Okay, I can't see it, but I can assume the viewers can. Okay, thanks. So this graphic is a simple version of a multi-step process that this charter change is going through. So the first step is the Charter Commission's work. Since we've convened in first convened in October, we've been meeting every couple weeks, discussing policy options, crafting educational materials, which includes a fact sheet that's available in English and 7 other languages. And now we're in the public education and stakeholder engagement phase of the process. So getting feedback from you, the public, on the proposal that our diverse commission has formed initial consensus around. On town meeting day, a couple of us were out and handed out hundreds of those fact sheets that I mentioned, and folks were really appreciative of the information. But since the coronavirus is limiting in-person outreach and events, we're now trying to spread the word through other creative, safely distanced means, like this program. Then as a commission, we'll evaluate the feedback, make potential changes to our recommendation if needed, and submit a final report to the City Council in August. In any of the kind of public outreach efforts we're in, we're not here to debate for or against all resident voting, but really trying to provide the best information we can and seek input. So we will correct folks on facts to the best of our ability if we need to, but we really are trying to maintain just some independence and not either-sidedness. All of our Charter Commission meetings are open to the public and include public comment. And our next meetings are on Tuesday, July 7th and Tuesday, July 15th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. And at our next meeting, we're specifically hearing from the public on any other recommended changes to the charter if there are those that folks would like us to consider. So all of that is just step one in this multi-step process. Then it's really the City Council's decision. They will discuss our recommended language and policy recommendations. They'll review the comments that we've received and the feedback we've gotten, the questions we've gotten. And then they'll also have public participation events, and then we'll vote on whether to put the charter change question on the November ballot. And then if it's on the ballot, a majority of current voters will get to decide whether or not to approve the measure. So if over 50% of voters on election day say, yes, we approve this charter change question, then it has to go to the legislature for review and approval by both the House and Senate. And then finally, if the House and Senate vote to approve the measure, the governor has to sign the bill. Only then would residents who are not citizens currently be allowed to register and vote in local elections. So this is, again, step one of a many staged process at which there's public engagement throughout. And if there's a no vote at any of those points, then we kind of have to start over from the beginning. So that's the process. Our commission has considered a variety of policy options and questions. And so to have a little bit more back and forth, I'll put those questions to Hussein, who will answer for us, and then I'll either expand upon, clarify, or move on to the next question. Sound good, Hussein?
Yes, yes.
All right. So first, Hussein, allowing folks who aren't citizens to vote isn't a new idea. Could you provide a little bit more background on the history of non-citizens voting in the US or in Vermont?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So non-citizen voting in the US is not new to this country. All resident voting in election goes back to the founding of the United States. After the American Revolution, non-US citizens were allowed to vote in many states. By the 19th century, non-citizens in at least 22 states were voting in local, state, and national elections. But a flood of immigrants to America at the start of the 20th century fueled a rise of anti-immigrant sentiment, and by 1926, all states had abolished the practice. As of today, non-citizens are allowed to vote in some local elections in Chicago, San Francisco, and in a town in the state of Maryland. The process has been proven to be successful. Other communities in Vermont are considering this. It was approved locally in Montpelier in the year 2019, that was last year, and is also under discussion in Burlington, not far from here.
Great, thanks. And the Montpelier charter change question is in the legislature now and going through that process of review from the House and Senate. And then I would just note, it's, I'm sure, obvious to folks who know any American history, but even though non-citizens were allowed to vote in some of those elections, there were a lot of other people left out of elections, including women, people of color. And so the point is that is not that elections used to be great, but that non-citizens were allowed to vote, and that has changed. And we can change who's allowed to vote once again locally if we'd like to. So my next question, Hussein, is just how many new people in Winooski would be qualified to vote if this measure passed?
Good question. So a total of 6,131 people will be allowed to legally vote in local elections here in Winooski. So that's about 5,041 native U.S. citizens who would make up about 82% of the voting list. 272 naturalized citizens who will make up 8% of the voting list. And lastly, 618 non-U.S. citizens who will make up 10% of the voting list here in Winooski.
Mm-hmm. So that's 10% of folks who are of voting age living in Winooski now who aren't currently allowed to vote in local elections, but would be eligible in the future to register and vote if this measure is approved. That's right?
Yes, that's right.
Great. Okay, so what do you mean by qualified? I know we've talked about this a little bit in the commission, but can you expand upon what the qualifications to vote that we've discussed are laid out?
Oh, definitely. So by qualified, we mean that Winooski residents who are here under a federal sanctioned legal category, such as green card, permanent resident visa, etc., who will be 18 years of age or older on election day. So those are the people that will be legally allowed to vote if this charter change is a success.
Mm-hmm.
So on top of that, but we consider not specifying legal status, keeping it to simply all residents. That was kind of the common agreement that we came up with as a charter commission, because it was consistent with Montpelier and other municipalities around the country. It was also more comfortable for majority of current voters, as well as more protective of new voters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to make one additional point on that, for those who have expressed concerns about agencies like ICE using this list potentially to go after illegal immigrants, that was something that we also just wanted to avoid being an option. So by specifying that it's residents who are here under that federally sanctioned legal category, whichever one it is, that means that they wouldn't be at risk of being deported by ICE or whomever. So that was another consideration that we talked about. And just what do we mean by a resident? Who's a resident?
So at the charter, we came up with the definition of a resident will be someone who resides in Winooski with the intention of staying. So this can be applicable to someone who's already voting here in Winooski as well.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've talked in the commission about you go to the city clerk's office to register, and you when you do that, make a not a vow, but I'm trying to remember the word. You express that you intend to you live in Winooski and you intend to stay in Winooski is the basic requirement. So could non-citizens run for office?
Good question. So under the current charter language, if all qualified Winooski residents are allowed to vote in local elections, they're also qualified to be able to run for office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So this would apply in that case as well as currently proposed. And would the voter registration lists be public?
Yes. So the city will maintain 1, a state and national voter legislation list, and 2, a municipal voter legislation list of all qualified Winooski voters. Both will be available upon request, but your citizenship status is not public.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So that means that we'll also have 2 ballots. So when you go to the polls, you get your local ballot and you get your state and federal ballot. And that was when I went to town meeting day. I got the local ballot and the state and federal ballot as well. So it's pretty similar in that way. And the list of Winooski voters would include all citizens, naturalized citizens, non-citizens, but just in the same order that they're in on any regular list by your last name. So there wouldn't really be a way of kind of knowing just from the list itself who is and isn't a citizen. It's just the Winooski voter list. So one of the more common questions that we get, or just the feelings, the opinions that are expressed on this issue is just why don't people just become citizens? If you want to vote, you should just become a citizen. So Hussein, could you talk about what some of the factors are that folks who are living here might be facing?
Yeah, definitely. So Liz, it's quite complicated actually. So there are a lot of barriers.
I can't hear you anymore. Can you make sure you're not muted?
A long waiting list. So depending on where you are from, or only a small number of people are allowed to access citizenship every year. So like if you're from, say, I don't know, Uganda, there's like, kind of a small number of people who are allowed to, gain a citizenship every year from Uganda. So another factor is future access to homeland. So some people don't want to give up the right to travel home or move home in the future, and U.S. citizenship could eliminate that possibility. Lastly, cost. So the application itself is about $725 classes and lawyers if needed, and that can be very costly sometimes. Currently, I'm not a U.S. citizen myself. My family is not, but we are reaching to the 5 years requirement to actually apply for citizenship. And I don't know how it's gonna go, but I one thing I know is it's gonna be complicated, and hopefully we do get citizenship. But again, it's like I just said, it's very complicated.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't hear you at the very beginning, so I just would ask, can you repeat the first point that you made? I think it was about time, there being like a limit, for how long you've been here.
Oh, sure. So you like people often have to have lived here for at least a minimum of 3 to 5 years before they can legally apply for citizenship. So and it all depends on who you are, where you come from, and how did you get here in the United States.
Right. That reminds me of hearing in one of our first Charter Commission meetings from Prashant, who is another commissioner with us. His story was really striking. He's from India, and he lives in Winooski, owns his house, his kids go to the school, and I think he actually lives like right next to school and might help with the crossing guard, and very, very wonderful person, wonderful family. He works for a company in town here, but the number of people who immigrate from India, there's a cap on how many people can become citizens, and the list is so long that it would be like many, many, many years, much longer than 3 to 5 years before he would be eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship. I had no idea that was the case, and it was just one example of someone's story with hundreds of people from all over the world who live here in Winooski, which makes it such a wonderful place. There's so many different stories, so many different reasons why people come here and settle down. And hearing Prashant's story was really valuable for me to understand just who might want to vote, who can't currently. And for me, it's folks like him who are living here and really want to be active citizens that are currently left out. And there's an opportunity to get, more people involved in our community in meaningful ways. So I'd be eager to hear from other folks who have stories like that. That would be illuminating for those residents who have been here all their lives and might not really understand kind of why you don't just become a citizen. And it's a reasonable question to ask, but it's got a different answer, it seems like, for every person you talk to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. It's very complex, and I think helping people understand this will probably help.
Yeah. Great. So I don't think we've had any calls. We did get a couple questions, and we have, I think, 3 minutes left. And I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them yet, but at our next commission meeting on July 7th, we can share them. One was whether or not all of the other changes to the charter, like what those are, and are those going to be on the same question as the all resident voting? I think it's a really good question, and whether those could be separated or should be together. We haven't really talked about. Most of the other changes are administrative, things like changing the language of a volunteer firefighter, just taking out volunteer because they're paid. And then a couple other points from League of Cities and Towns. There were a couple that we did discuss and are continuing to discuss on kind of changing the requirement for leaving city council if you run for mayor, which happened in the last election. And there were some questions that we had. So we asked Jesse Baker, who's our city manager and staff to this commission, to come back with some pros and cons to that question of whether a seat would be vacant, how much more effort is it to run a special election, just to like wrap our heads around it a little bit more. And there was one other similar question. I can't remember who's saying if you can or not, but we have many different perspectives on the commission. Residents who have been here and whose families have been here for generations, and folks who have moved here from other countries. So I think we've developed a lot of really valuable trust and are able to grapple with questions that can be sometimes a little heated. And we're now able to just talk about what the questions are that people have in a really constructive way. And so if you haven't had your question answered here, do email Winooski charter at winooskivt.gov. And there's a whole bunch more resources on the Winooski Charter Commission webpage, which I think they'll have up in the box. So thank you so much for watching, and we will be around on Charter Commission meetings.